Good morning, everybody, and today it's actually morning. I got to bed a little early last night, so I most of the times this little show is just completely whatever pops into my head. But I actually had something I wanted to talk about, which was you may have noticed last night's absenteeism on my part. I was working on the horses yesterday on the making all the fabricating the parts and using the parts that came in the kit for the stagecoach. And you've heard me comment before on how complex the harnesses are. The harness system is. The harnesses are. Public school victim. So I was fabricating parts out of leather, and my wife gave me 3 different kinds of leather to use, which is good because different parts of the harness have different thicknesses of leather, and it's actually looking okay. I'm not unhappy with it. Also got into finally started using the links. They have these gold metal links, like chain links, and different sizes for different functions. And the instructions could be better. They're not bad, but you sort of got to figure things out. A lot of good text, but you got to know what stuff is. So I went and watched a video on how to drive a stage team, and they went over the harness system. And while I'm on that, I want to sort of correct something I said, or add to something I said yesterday. Okay, the big sort of oval-shaped padded collar, which is the horse collar, or the collar that goes over the horse's head, and that's basically kind of like a football pad. It's a pad because that is what the reason it's so thick is that's what the horse pushes on to pull a wagon. Now, the hames you heard me talk about the other day, that's the big kind of curvy metal piece that's on each side. You'll see the little handles or whatever, pommels sticking up from the thing, but it has the metal rings on it. That's what you clip the various parts of the harness to, so that when the horse pulls, it's pushing against that pad, and the hames, which is a big metal part, picks up that, attaches to the harness, the framing mechanism. Off you go, the tongue of the wagon and everything. So, of course, you have the bridle on its head, the bit in its mouth. The part that goes over the back where a saddle would be is actually called the back saddle, or the saddle. The part that the rear horses, not the front part, not the front team, but the rear team, actually have several big curved straps that go around the horse's backside, and that's called I believe that's called the brace, or the braces, bracelets. Anyway, that basically is like the brake, because if a horse stops, the wagon wants to keep going. That big pad around its neck is not going to stop anything. If the wagon keeps going, it will just pull the horse forward up under the jaw. But by putting those straps around the rear end of the horse, when the horse stops and the wagon tries to roll forward a little bit, those straps will push on the rear of the horse, which it can hold against and help kind of work as a braking mechanism. The big heavy straps that go down the side that are hooked to the harness, it's called the yoke. But that piece that goes on the big straps that go down the side on each side of the horse, that are basically the main drive shaft, if you will, those are called traces. And the traces are chain linked to the wooden bar that goes behind the horse, and that's called the yoke. So anyway, that made it a little easier to read the instructions. So watch a 3-minute YouTube video before you build this model on how that goes together, and the instructions make more sense. Well, I must be missing an entire runner tree, sprue tree, because I literally have exactly half the components I need for the horses. I have 2 sets of hames, 2 collars, 2 back straps, 4 traces when I need 8. So, of course, I can fabricate these things out of leather. And a lot of people said, well, they're not going to look right. And you were right. And I thought about making resin castings, but that's going to be too brittle, because these things have to have a little, even with plastic, plastic has enough flexibility. You got to be able to move these things around a little bit to fit them. And so that's why I started, since the real parts are made leather, I figured I'd cut leather, and it's working okay. But where the hames are concerned, this is this long curving piece with rings on it. I may have to do some resin casting or dream something else up. One of the nice things about the Old West was those folks are highly inventive, and I could always, hand make something and just go, well, field expedient. Things broke, they made what they had to. But I actually bought a resin casting kit, a little one, $20, $30 one, long time ago, and I bought two of them, a big one and a small one. And the big one I used to make a underside for a Star Trek shuttle, because I wanted to. Those kits are so expensive that I wanted to make one that I wanted to do some kit bash with, and I have no idea why I did air quotes on kit bash, because that's a regular word. I was going to say something special, but I meant kit bash. But the underside was too complex, so I made the mold, but have yet to use it for anything. It's still sitting in the shed. But this might be the perfect opportunity to break out that little resin kit and go ahead and make those hames out of resin. They're going to be a little touchy because you have to bend that metal through there and pinch it, and those rings would be extremely small. There are other things I can do. I could cut it out of the heavy leather, stiffen it, and then loop the rings in it, which would work. I could just make some plastic arms for it. I got a couple options. We'll see what I do. I have to admit, despite I'll call it frustration of having to make some of these parts, it is kind of cool to get challenged. Oh, I got to make this complex. But there's a certain joy in that. But, and that leads to what I was going to talk about last night. My wife just spent the last 3 days entertaining family, and we had a great time, but she was very busy taking care of us all, and we ate great, and she was just did a wonderful job. And I was working on the models, working on the horses. I had a point where I had to stop and take a break, let everything set. And I come inside, and John Kitt, or as I call him, my Canadian slot car guy, up in Toronto, wanted to have a Zoom so we could talk about some sound quality issues I'd been having, or because he has professional recording background. And since I got my new microphone, he's like, hey, I'll help you with a few techniques. I great, if you're going to record in the microphone and you're getting, I have a pop blocker, but if you're getting, put your finger in front of, Peter picked a pipe, and it helps break up that pop from the P. So anyway, a lot of great little ideas. Well, what was supposed to be a 20 or 30 minute help session turned into a 3-hour plus gab session. We were having a grand old time, just talking about everything under the sun. We didn't record anything because this wasn't a show. And I mean, let's face it, model builders are like any club, or a group. We're kind of a social lot. You get us talking about models, and of course, then it turns into airplanes and cars, and I did this, and I went there. Oh, I've been, yeah, that's great. La, 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 la. And he showed me his secret hideaway, which is cool. Actually, it's a sound studio. He has his own actual, real honest to God studio, because he's a musician also. Well, anyway, John, you should do your own show at that, because I mean, that's as cool as the shed, man. Maybe cooler. But anyway, I'm sorry, getting sidetracked. So, and my wife, God bless her, she left the room, so I could have my privacy. I'm like, it's okay, baby. I got the background up, you can. But I went back to work in the shed for a few minutes, and long story short was I realized, basically she left the bedroom because she does a lot of her work in the bedroom, and she basically just went and did other things for 3 hours. She has spent the last 3 days taking care of us, and I'm like, oh my God, I've made her a kit model widow. And I was like, no, I'm not going back to the shed. I've kind of hit a frustration point. I'm glad to be making progress, but it's starting to turn too much into work because I have a deadline. I just need a night off to spend with my wife, who, God bless her, hasn't complained one iota about any of this. So we just spent the evening binge watching Face Off. seasons 1 and 2, and I think season 3. And it was nice to get it, but I didn't want to just not put something up, so I was just sitting in my recliner, because I have, if you guys remember when I had the hip replacement, I got the big electronic recliner in my bedroom, which is where our TV is, our big screen TV, and I just sat there and watched television. And Face Off is a show, I'm sure most of you guys are probably familiar with it, but it's competition, Hollywood prosthetics, amateurs doing Hollywood prosthetics, and the winner gets a bunch of prizes. But it's akin to model building, because they do a lot of casting, resin, molding, all that kind of stuff. And some of the people are insanely talented. In fact, one of the girls that was on season 2 or season 3 was actually had been the roommate of one of my coworkers, one of my flight attendants. And yeah, Nick, I'm talking about, you know which one I'm talking about. I don't want to say any names, but anyway, by the way, Nick, you ever still hear from her at all? Anyway, but that's why the night off. But I'll be back to it today, and but I do have physical therapy, and I have to. It turned out that piece of wood I was going to use is too big, and I don't have a prop. I have a jigsaw, but cutting a straight line with a jigsaw is a trick, and I want this to look real nice. So I'm going to go to one of the hardware stores and have them cut me a 10-inch wide, 3-foot long piece. And it was going to be longer than that, but then I realized, you start getting into where the diorama is getting unwieldy big. So that leaves me 2.5 feet for the coach, another 6 inches to put I'm going to have a felled fallen tree in front of the coach to make it stop, with the bandito standing behind the bush, ready to pounce out at him. So that'll leave me just enough room to get all that without having a lot of extraneous stuff or make it too big. And he measured his bar, so remember, measure twice, cut once. But so if I do the resin casting, I'll make sure to take some pictures. And one of the getting back to something I was saying, I meant to admit, you guys have sent in a lot of great suggestions, and believe me, I read them all, at least try to. But someone said, or actually a couple folks may have mentioned, that you should cut all your pieces out of leather for continuity. And I thought about that, and that's still not off the table, but at this stage, I don't think it's going to happen. Oh, by the way, luckily, the sprue that I do have does have the braces, the rear parts for the back side of the horses. So, because they only go on the rear team. So that must have been the tree that I got. Anyway, so I've got that. What I'm doing, because everything's black and the horses are brown, so none of this stuff like pops out at you. A lot of the detail hides down in the complexity. So what I'm doing is the plastic detailed traces and everything are going on the outside of both horses, and the leather cut ones are going to go on the inside of each team, where you can't see it nearly as well. And the two collars and hames that I have that are from the kit will go on the lead horses, because they'll be more visible there. And so I think that's gonna turn out okay. And again, like one of the nice things about the Old West is somebody says, "Oh, collar." Well, yeah, that's a field expedient, man. They had a problem. He had to make it out of what he could. He had to shoot a cow and make that out of leather himself. Prove me wrong, and I'll guarantee there are plenty of folks who did in the Old West. And that brings us to our last point about the stage. Since it didn't have any decals, which was a mixed blessing, now I have the freedom to make it however I want. And I have so many great resource photos. I had so much fun painting the trim on it, now I have a certain freedom they didn't have before. And I'm thinking, I got two choices. One's going to be a royal pain in the keister, but follow me on this. Well, 3 choices. 2 of them are decal choices, and one's stencil choice. I can print out Wells Fargo, Overland Stagecoach or whatever I want, and I can put that up where it's supposed to be, and use a little of that temporary tack glue to put down the middle of the O's and everything, and get all lined up, and then airbrush so the gold will match perfectly with the trim. So when I peel it off, Wells Fargo, Overland Stagecoach, and then just touch up whatever I have to. Or I can make a decal and try to make it in gold Wells Fargo and put that in there. Or, and this gets back to the problem, is a lot of times when you print decal on clear decal film, it doesn't really stand out very well. A lot of times I found, depending on the color you're using, when you lay it, the colors just aren't bright enough, and the paint kind of shows through, so you wind up with this really weak decal. I've had some of them you couldn't even see. It looked good on paper, and you put it on the model, and the thing was bloody near invisible. Now I have a laser jet, so that helps. The other option is to try and match the red background and print the gold on red, but with a printer and everything, you probably never match the colors exactly. And so you would have because it would go on white paper. And then have, of course, to be the red bar with the gold Wells Fargo on it. But if I put that up there, you're almost guaranteed it's not going to match the rest of the maroonish red of the Stagecoach. So you're going to have a color mismatch, but they'll pop better. So those are the three options. And obviously, I'm sure painting is the highest quality. Of course, that means I got to get the X-Acto knife and perfectly etch out that print Wells Fargo and then etch it out perfectly and get it to fit and da-da-da-da-da. So it's the biggest pain in the keister, but again, when you're doing stuff for other people, you tend to want to do a better job. Well, there's a fourth choice. I could try and get in there and, hand paint it or use a paint pen to write it, but you guys have seen how steady I am. Again, at that scale, it might look okay. I just don't have faith in my hand etching skills or hand printing skills. So go ahead and toss what you think the way you would do it. No decals, and you want to put Wells Fargo Overland Stage Company, and then I'll put U.S. Mail on the door, and I might add a few frills and fancies. You got to be careful not to overdo it though, because you get the thing looking good, and you go, oh, I'll add some fleur-de-lis and some filigree and whatever they call that stuff, the little curly Q, gold curl. And the next thing you know, you've pimped the ride out to look something like something Cinderella would be riding in. But that's where we're at now. But first I have to go get physical therapy. Oh, just a side note. At the moment, I'm scheduled to see, my note says I can go back to work on the 21st. I'm scheduled to see one doctor on the 22nd that I have to get a letter from, and I think the 23rd I'm scheduled for my flight physical. So that's just a couple of weeks from now. So if I get all three of those taken care of, that, or get all that taken care of without any trouble, then I'll effectively I'll be back at work then. And of course I have to schedule retraining. I have no idea how long that'll take. They'll probably be pretty quick about it. I don't know if it's a 2-day or 4-day course. I'll be up to the training department, but which means that probably in about a week, I'm going to have to start cutting back all this. Of course, I want this to be done before that starts. So I basically have a week-ish to finish, because I'm going to need at least 4 days, but maybe a week to get back in the books and relearn everything I've forgotten. And gross ramp weight 114,550 pounds. Gross takeoff weight 1,000 or 114,200 pounds. Gross landing weight 97,000 pounds. I think. See, there's all these numbers. These are memory items I have to have. And there's 8 memory items. Cabin pressure. Rapid decompress. Crew masks on. 100% crew communications established, and you have to have it verbatim. Runaway trim. Autopilot disconnect, press and hold. Cutout switches on. Things like that. This is stuff it has to be, because you get asked every one of these during an oral, and and then there's all the procedure you have to go through, and then the V1 cuts, and you're going to be right up at V1 and actually V1 cuts, for those who don't know, in a multi-engine aircraft, in those light planes, the twins, I call them blue line, but V1 is the minimum speed to control the aircraft with an engine and operative, with critical engine and operative, but jets don't really have, generally speaking, critical engines. That's more of a propeller thing because of center line of thrust and stuff. But which, by the way, center line of thrust is not on the prop axis when you're climbing. It would be in level flight if you were perfectly nose down, but you never fly perfectly nose down. You always have a little incidence. So the critical engine is the one with the descending blade, because it's biting more when you're climbing, because it's biting more air than the prop that's coming up, because the blades have a twist in them, and the blade that's going up has less angle to the air, but things ticked up, and the twist of the blade pulling down gets a big bite on the air. So anyway, but in a jet, it's just a V1. And they love to, it actually is required, they have to kill the motor at you right at V1. You got to bottom, well, you don't well, in Airbus, I hear you bottom the rudder. The Embraer, it's about a third rudder. Get it stable, ease it off the ground. You got to fly out in a straight line, clean it up. And, but the real sloppy ones are the V2 cuts, which V2 is a slightly high, that's your best climb speed on one engine. Up to acceleration altitude, which is usually 1,000 feet above field elevation, or AFE. And the reason is when you got all three gears on the ground, you smoke an engine, you mash that rudder, that nose wheel steering, and the rudder together keep you going pretty straight. You've got rudder authority, but you also have that nose wheel. You let it get stable and you ease it up and adjust the rudder as necessary. It's a pretty delicate stuff. It's always going to be in almost zero visibility, so you're on the gauges. And you ease it up and you're flying and trying to keep the ball centered. This is like the sloppiest thing we usually do. Pause rate, gear up. And once you clean the gear up and start flying, okay. And it can, but if you let it get a little out of whack, I'm holding my hands like this because the Embraer has these ram's horn controls on it. So it's like, we call it the big wheel, like the big wheel handlebars. But you let it get a little too sloppy on you, or have your correction in the wrong way or something, you're going to be slopping all over the sky, and you can get in trouble. But you get on top of it quick, and you can make it real pretty, real pretty. And but the V2 comes just after you're airborne. You swing the gear. Now the gear, both hanging down in the slipstream and when you have all three wheels on the ground, is like a rudder. It's very stabilizing. Pause rate, gear up, no problem flying. They smoke a motor just as the gear comes up. Well, now the airplane's very clean. It's awesome flap down. And although you have a little more authority, so because you're going faster, so the controls are more sensitive, and it's really easy to over control it, which is a mistake a lot of people make. And when they do the V1 cuts, those are the ones that get ugly, because guys will hit too much rudder or whatever, and the plane will just start slopping all over the place. And I've had it in the sim. I've done a couple of those. I mean, we flew out of it, it saved the day, but it was not pretty. So woohoo, air show time, baby. If you're in visual conditions, it's a little easier because you have instant ground situational awareness. But when you're on instruments, it's a little trickier because you're kind of chasing the gauges, so to speak. But well, the glass cockpit is not too bad, but it comes from being a little rusty. And those are the kinds of things. And once the V1 cuts and V2 cuts are done in the check, right, like, okay, now I can just handle engine fires and single engine approaches, easy by comparison. Then you have the almost 0-0 approaches. We have a heads-up display, a HUD in the aircraft that I fly, so doing the super low mins approaches and everything is kind of like playing a video game. The other time it gets a little tricky is when you're doing the single engine hand-flown ILS, is the instrument landing system, is that once you break out at the bottom, you see the runway, and you cut, okay, land, you say landing, you throttle back. And but now you have all that trim in there for the rudder trim for that engine. Well, now you're bringing the power out, so the nose wants to swing. So now you're having to manually apply opposite rudder, and it tends to get a little sloppy, so it's rarely a pretty landing. You can try and get the trim out, but the problem is you're close to the ground, and you don't down here fiddling with electric switches when you should be focusing on flying. It's probably better just to muscle your way through it. But also, if something happens, oh, the fire truck just pulled on the runway, oh no, go around. Well, you're going around one engine. If you just took all the trim out, now you're back to mashing the rudder. Oh, but if you leave that trim in and you have to go around, it's more manageable, but you still have to be on top of it. That's a situation that could fall apart in a hurry. And I'm sorry, I did not mean to get into a flying lesson. Well, that's all for tonight, guys. This morning, guys. We'll see you tonight.